Welcome to the topic, Let's Talk About Mental Health. A rather unusual topic for discussing to a tech group. Uh, However, I'm both a tech person and a mental health provider, and so I was asked to speak on this because seeing how COVID-19 is out there, we have a lot of different type of mental health challenges. So welcome if you're here for this presentation. We do have an agenda. I'll talk about who I am and what I do, our role with Hexnode and COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19 on mental health, signs of depression, suicidal ideation and what to do, and how to stay mentally healthy. But let's talk about who I am. I'm Raymond Anderson. I'm a licensed clinical professional counselor and substance abuse counselor in the state of New Mexico. I also have a doctorate in counseling, and I worked for 30 years in a nonprofit licensed community mental health center. I retired in March of 2020 after that time. However, over that amount of time, I actually did a fair amount of roles. I was clinical director for part of the time, director of operations for a lot of the time. I was over IT, also a therapist, and so I met with a whole bunch of folks in regards to substance abuse, trouble that they might be in, and a trainer, both clinical and non-clinical subjects. Some of the non-clinical would be HIPAA privacy and security, and health and safety, and those type of things. So I also concurrently worked for Lifelink Training Institute since 2003 to the present. And with that, I traveled both nationally and internationally, training best practice to behavioral health personnel for substance abuse disorders and other type of things as well. The projects that we're focusing on now is training the state of New Mexico in a thing called SBIRT, which is Screening, Brief Intervention, and Referral to Treatment, which has to do with working with physical clinics and getting a screen previous to seeing the physician or whoever it might be, and assessing for not only substance, but also mental health things that might be going on, and seeing if we can intervene based on the level of risk that the person might be in. We also have data collection going on of those who are affected by COVID-19 for FEMA through the state of New Mexico. Most of my job with that is actually mostly IT type of work, but about 30% is where I do clinical training utilizing certified peer support workers out there in the state to collect this data. So our role with Hexnode and COVID-19 is that we began the project in June of 2020 and collecting data on the iPads throughout the state for those being temporarily housed due to involvement with COVID-19. So it could be in any way. If they're affected in any way by COVID-19, they might be temporarily housed because of that. So we needed a way to track data for FEMA, and we have iPads out there. And it's really good to have a company like Hexnode that allows us to keep track of what's happening on the iPads, to allow and disallow certain applications, make sure that they're being used right, even the location of the iPad. And so we're very happy about that, as Hexnode is what we needed to accomplish this. So the data collected by FEMA is through a web portal to them, and it's not necessarily on the iPad itself. So we don't have to worry about that part. It gets imported right into the FEMA database. So in regards to the presentation, things to know is that many have been affected by depression and suicide. And I know that this topic can be difficult to address and even taboo in some cultures. What we do know is that, sort of the final phase there of if it should go to that, is that suicide is preventable. And so we're going to be talking about that. And if you become uneasy during the topic, go ahead and log off. It's not the goal to make you feel horrible. But if you are deeply affected, please visit the website below, www.opencounseling.com/suicide hotlines. Now, I don't have any vested interest in this particular group. It was just, I just did a Google search on international suicide hotlines and it popped up. And so they have phone numbers for helplines in many, many countries. So in the US, the number is 1-800-273-8255. Now, keep in mind that this is really a presentation of hope. We're going to be giving you some direct things to do should you find yourself encountering a suicidal person. Hope for you so that you know what to do, and also to bring hope to a person who might be thinking that way. And if you wish to call my office in the near future to talk, it's 505-467-8144. So I realize that this is sort of jumping right into, when you're talking about mental health, there's a lot of aspects to mental health. And at the same time, I chose the topic that is the topic that most folks don't get information in. And that is, what about suicidal thoughts? What about someone that might be thinking about suicide? So it's kind of moving right to the end of the discussion, and so I understand that it might be a little bit heavy, and yet it's actually a message of hope. So why talk about depression and suicide? Well, it's around us. My assumption is that since most of you are here in the tech field, this might be new information to you. Kudos to Hexnode for allowing such a sensitive topic in the agenda. Many people have been exposed to depression and suicide. It's out there. But most folks really don't know what to do with it when they encounter it. Most folks typically run, which makes perfect sense because you're not quite sure what to do. But if you're well versed in it, great. Keep in mind that this is a basic presentation on this, nothing more. If you have extra training in mental health, you might want me to have said this or said that. And it's one of those things, I only have a certain amount of time, and so I'm going to be condensing this as much as I can and giving information that will hopefully be helpful to you. For those who feel inadequate or just petrified of such topics, this again is a presentation of hope for when you do run across these situations. So, recognizing depression and suicidal ideation and what to do. Again, it might appear as a morbid topic, but this is a presentation about hope. So, we talk about this because people right now are experiencing loss in all forms: income, employment, their health, family, friends. And these are just two examples from one article from USA Today on the impact of COVID. The National Alliance on Mental Illness Helpline reported a 65% increase in calls from March 1st to April 30th from the previous year. The Disaster Distress Helpline, a sub-network of the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline that offers emotional support to people in need after natural and human-caused disasters, saw an 890% spike in call volume in April compared with April of 2019. So if you think that folks are not being impacted by this, they certainly are. And this just isn't a family issue. It affects employers, it affects fellow employees, communities, the cities, the states, and up and beyond throughout the entire world. So this isn't just a topic for us here in New Mexico. It is a topic for about everybody during this time when folks are losing hope. So some quick facts. During late June, 40% of U.S. adults reported struggling with mental health or substance use. This is from the CDC.gov. About 31% had anxiety or depression symptoms. Trauma or stressor-related disorder symptoms, about 26%. 13% either started using substances or increased their substance use from what it previously was. And 11% seriously considered suicide. So this is something that's on our plate for all of us, that we need to at least know what to do should it be presented to us. So I do have a disclaimer here. I'm going to be giving some information, but I'm not teaching people how to diagnose whatsoever. I'm not teaching people how to be mental health professionals. If you want to be a mental health professional, you'll probably need to go back to school and go through a lot of courses so that you can diagnose and know what to do in certain cases. However, there are plenty of general suicide prevention courses out there for the public that do not teach people how to diagnose. It's sort of like what I'm doing here today, and it's how do we catch people that are on the brink of taking their life. So it is a brief overview for non-behavioral health people. Now, I'm an instructor for mental health first aid and QPR, which stands for Question, Persuade, and Refer. I'm not using their materials. I don't receive any compensation for their mention, but do suggest that these are good trainings to take from a qualified trainer somewhere in the US or internationally. And I can't cover everything that would be in a regular presentation on these topics. So that's my disclaimer. We do have a lot of adverse mental health going on. London reported many COVID-19 survivors are likely to be at a greater risk of developing mental illness, psychiatrists said on Monday, after a large study found 20% of those affected with the coronavirus are diagnosed with a psychiatric disorder within 90 days. It does affect people. And I apologize for reading these, so bear with me. Next slide. Symptoms of anxiety disorder and depressive disorder increased considerably in the United States during April through June of 2020 compared with the same period in 2019. To assess mental health, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation during the pandemic, representative panel surveys were conducted among adults 18 or older across the United States during June 24th through 30th. Over about 40% of respondents reported that at least one adverse mental or behavioral health condition were present, including symptoms of anxiety and depressive disorder, about 30%, symptoms of trauma and stressor-related disorders related to the pandemic, about 26%, and having started or increased substance use to cope with the stress or emotions related to COVID, about 13%. That also comes from the CDC. The percentage of respondents who reported having seriously considered suicide in the 30 days before completing the survey was significantly higher among respondents aged 18 to 24, about 25%, minority or racial ethnic groups, Hispanic respondents 18%, non-Hispanic Black respondents 15%, self-reported unpaid caregivers for adults, almost 31%, and essential workers, about 22%, also from the CDC. So, where do we start? Let's start with some signs of depression. What are these signs? Well, this isn't a comprehensive list, but it is somewhat of a list. Typically, those folks who are feeling depressed feel like most things are hopeless. They have lost hope. It seems like there's a cloud over them, and they can't see except straight ahead. There's blinders on, and they have lost hope. They typically lose interest in things that they have felt interested in. They often have guilt or feelings of worthlessness, helplessness. They might have eating or sleeping changes. For instance, it could be on either one of them. It could be going quite a bit less or quite a bit more. So for some folks that are getting depressed, they might end up eating more than what they typically eat. Other folks may eat less than what they typically eat. Same way with sleeping. Some folks who maybe slept for 6 hours a day now are sleeping 10 or 12. On the other hand, folks that were sleeping 8 hours, for instance, are now sleeping 4. Now, keep in mind, it's based on that person's pattern of sleeping. If you have a person that typically only sleeps 5 hours, that's not really a change for them to sleep 5 hours. That's their pattern. However, if you do have changes that are kind of significant in the person's sleeping or eating, then that might be a flag. Also, substance use. Some people start substances when they're depressed. Some people increase their substance use. And let me just say this, substances are not a good substitute for getting proper mental health care. People think that substances will help them with their depression, and oftentimes it works just the opposite. If you have a person that's depressed, there are things out there that can be done, cognitive behavioral therapy and maybe some medication for them. But using substances to help with mental health conditions is really not a good idea. One of the other things about being depressed is that you don't want to get help for it. You don't have the oomph for it. You don't necessarily care. You do care, and at the same time, you just have a big blah feeling about everything. So if you're trying to talk someone and you look like you're depressed, they might agree with you. Let's go get some help, and they might say, "No, I don't think I want to." That's also sort of a sign of depression. And there may be thoughts of death. We hope not. That's certainly not the majority of the cases when people are depressed, but there are some folks that they get into a level of depression to where they actually think suicidally. So some causes of depression, what causes it? Well, there could be abuse, past or current abuse that someone is going through. Medications, there are certain medications that might lead to depression. And there are side effects of medications that also might lead to depression as well. Loss is a big thing right now with COVID-19, through death, certain relationships, financially, property losses, all kinds of losses that are happening that affect people. And that's a huge one. Someone might feel trapped in a job, trapped in a relationship, trapped financially, whatever it might be, feeling trapped. There can be a genetic component of depression as well, but let me just say that just because maybe depression runs in the family does not mean that you are going to get it. It just raises the risk level that you might have. Folks with serious illness can also become depressed. They don't necessarily see any way out of it. And so that's that kind of hopelessness that someone might experience. And when you use substances, that also messes with the mental health of a person. Substances mess with your mental health. They do not typically help it. And so substance use tends to hijack the body and the brain, and doesn't work out so well. As I made mention, there's therapy out there, there's medications if needed to help with depression. Substances are not meant to do that. So let's talk about suicide indications. How do you know when someone is thinking suicidally? Well, one is they might just talk about it. We're going to give you some examples in the next slide. They might be obtaining something that would end life, like a weapon of some sort, or pills, stockpiling pills, or even rope. Here in New Mexico, unfortunately, we've had folks that have ended their life through hanging. Now, keep in mind, as it says in the bottom of the slide there, that all of these do have to be taken in context. Maybe just one of them doesn't have significance. For instance, I was raised in a family in the Midwest where we hunted for food. And it wasn't anything unusual for us to go out and get another gun. The last thing on our mind was that we would hurt somebody with it. However, if you have someone that is saying, I would never hold a gun, I don't believe in them, and then they go out and buy one, that could be a flag. Obtaining something that might end life. For instance, when people gather something that typically is outside of their typical behavior. If you have someone that is out buying rope, but they don't have any indications they're going to build a swing or pull something, that might be a sign. Another thing might be withdrawing from others. People that are depressed and they don't feel well, and so they separate out from other people. Another thing might be a change of normal routines, eating or sleeping, becoming involved in strange or risky activities. That's outside of their normal. We talked about eating and sleeping already. Now, strange or risky activities, again, it depends on what the motive is. There are some people that just have a bucket list that they want to do before their time is up, and so maybe it's skydiving, so they want to go skydiving. Those are kind of normal things. However, if you have someone that just sort of turns and starts doing very risky behaviors, and it makes you scratch your head saying, I wonder why this person is doing this, that might be a sign. Starting drinking or drugs or increasing current use, we've talked about that already. Giving away valuable items, it might even include pets. Pets are pretty much family members. Or putting one's affairs in order. Now, I do know folks that are a bit older and they want to get rid of certain things, unclutter the house or whatever it might be. That's a normal type of thing. Or putting one's affairs in order. And so we have to sort of think about, all right, what's kind of normal? Do we see any of these other signs involved with it? So not just one thing. It might be multiple things that might be more of an indicator. Folks might want to make amends to enemies, or maybe they just want to confront their enemies, tell them what they really think before they take their life. And so, again, all of these things have to be taken into context, because one of them may or may not mean anything. So, what kind of language might somebody use if they're thinking about suicide? There are some folks that directly say, I'm going to kill myself, or I don't want to live anymore. Those are direct. However, there's a fair amount of people that don't talk directly. They say things like, I'm tired of all this. Or maybe they're saying they're not going to be around for something. I'm not going to be around for next holiday. I'm not going to be around for my next birthday. I don't have to worry about tax season next year. Those are all indications that they might be thinking about taking their life. Or they might be saying to you, well, if something happens to me, would you? And so those are indirect suicide language indicators. So keep in mind that folks that are thinking about taking their life don't necessarily use direct language. They use these more hidden language to let you know what's going on. We take all of these very, very seriously. We don't want to brush them off. We want to find out what's going on so that we can maybe intervene so that something bad doesn't happen. So how do you respond to suicidal language? Well, we have to ask the question. It's uncomfortable for a lot of folks, admittedly. But we want to ask the question, do you have thoughts of killing yourself, taking your life? Do you ever have thoughts like you wish you could go to sleep and not wake up? Do you sometimes wish you weren't alive? Now, there's a reason why we don't ask this. There are actually quite a few reasons. One is that we're afraid of an answer in the positive. It's like the person says, are you thinking of killing yourself? No. And we, wow, that was close. But if the person answers in the positive, it's like, oh my gosh, what do I do now? So it's not knowing what to do is the scariest thing. We feel we might offend the person. Now, the person may get upset. They may, by being asked that question. The majority of people actually feel a little bit relieved because someone is willing to talk with them. And that's a big thing right there. There's a lot of people that want to talk about what's going on with them. They're afraid to broach the subject with anybody. The other thing is that I've heard is that you might put the idea in their head if you ask them, are you thinking of killing yourself? Well, I've worked with a fair amount of folks over the 30 years, and not once have I ever heard from someone who I asked that question, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? Not even once has a person said, well, no, but now you mention it, I'll put that on as an option. Not even once has anybody ever said that to me. Why? Because when someone is in that much emotional pain or physical pain, I can almost guarantee you that they have thought about suicide. They've thought about, I don't know if I want to continue going on like this. I just not quite sure that I want to live like this at all. I feel horrible. So I can almost guarantee you that they've thought about it. You're not going to put a thought in somebody's head in regards to a new idea. Now here's what's not to say if you get a positive answer. Telling them to snap out of it. Demeaning them. Are you stupid or something? Look at all the good things you've got. Or just think positive. Or life isn't a bed of roses. Or your life isn't so bad. Or comparing your life with theirs. I went through divorce or financial problems, and you don't hear me talking that way. And this last one, you might have a tendency to ask this instead of asking the real question, are you thinking of hurting yourself? It's not a good question because some people that are thinking suicidally can be thinking more along the lines of, if you ask that, are you thinking of hurting yourself? And they think, actually not. I'm not thinking of hurting myself. I'm thinking about a solution to all this pain that I'm in. So asking the question, are you thinking of hurting yourself, is probably not a good question to ask, because they will revamp that in their mind and say, no, actually this is going to be a solution rather than hurting myself. So we need to kind of measure out risk with folks. How serious are they? If you hear a yes. Here's some things that you might say to them in regards to talking about suicide. Some people who are hurting as much as you are right now think about it, but don't have real intentions to actually do it. How serious are you about this? On a scale of 1 to 10, where 1 is just thinking about it but won't do it, to 10, I'm really serious about this, where would you be? Now, I don't go along with answers like a little or a lot. I actually kind of want a number so that it will give me an indication about how far down the line are they, you know? The next thing I might ask them about a time frame. Have you thought about a time frame when you're thinking about this? Obviously, if they say something like, yeah, I'm going to be doing it tomorrow, that is certainly giving you an indication that it's a lot more immediate than someone that says, I don't know. Maybe after my kids get out of school. That doesn't mean you take it off the table, but at least it's not the immediacy that of right now type of thing. Ask them if they have a plan, and then ask them if they've collected the things necessary to do it. Now again, they may not have a plan. That doesn't take it off the plate, but if they have a plan and they've collected the things necessary, the risk tends to go up. So how do we respond? How do we get these folks some help? This is where the rubber meets the road. Now that we've asked the question, we've found out that yes, they are thinking about it to some degree. Examples of things that you might say. I care about you and would like to get some help. Would you be willing to go to the hospital just to be safe for the moment? If you were having a heart attack, would you delay in getting some help? This is even more serious at the moment. So this is maybe a statement if you have someone that is thinking almost immediately about suicide. Or it seems that you're very serious about this. I care about you. Can we make a call right now to a helpline? They are specifically trained to know what to do. Another one might be, you're thinking about a very permanent decision here of which there's no way out once made. It will always be up to you to decide whether you want to make this decision. No one can take this decision from you, but I hope you will. Right now, reach out with me to make a call. I care. I want you around. Now, these are just some examples, that you might say. Now, here's some more. When people feel as bad as you do, they believe that there's no hope. It's like everything is dark. Given how much pain you are experiencing, what is there to lose by reaching out to a helpline? Let's call now. There's hope. Maybe if this person is your friend. If they're your friend, you might say something like, if I was feeling as bad as you do right now and saying the same things, wouldn't you want to help me? Let's get some help right now. What would you like to do? Go to the hospital? Call a helpline? What would you like to do? Did you notice the language that I use? I care. I want you around. Giving hope. Let them know that they mean something to you, even if you've just met them. Even one person who says that they care can interrupt these thoughts. People that are thinking about suicide are thinking very hopeless and helpless, and just even one person that reaches out and says, I care about this path that you're on, can actually disrupt that pattern. So things to keep in mind. For many, thinking suicidally is just temporary. It's a very close time frame, actually. And if you can interrupt the pattern even for a little bit, they can change their mind. What we don't want to do is just sort of, you hear somebody say, yes, I'm thinking about suicide. Don't just knee-jerk all of a sudden and call the police or the ambulance on them. You know, they've trusted you with their thoughts, and they need your confidence. I think that's the reason why a lot of people do not talk about thoughts of suicide, because they're afraid of the reactions that might come out. All of a sudden that the ambulance is going to go show up and they're going to be carted off to the hospital. And so I think most folks don't really talk about it because they're afraid of that type of reaction. Also, they don't need your wisdom or advice. They don't need you to tell them what to do, what they should be thinking, all this kind of stuff. If you go off on a long verbal whatever with them, what's going to happen is that it's going to be wow, 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 wow. They're not going to be listening to you whatsoever. So listen to them. Listen to them. Listen, listen, listen. Your goal should be try to ensure their safety. Now, if they have a weapon or something like that, or whatever it might be that they've collected, then have them give that to somebody until the storm passes. It's important that they do not have with them the things that might take their life. So see if they would be willing to give those things up for a time until they feel a little bit better. Now, you need to ensure your safety too. You know, if you feel like you might be harmed in whatever fashion, you know, you need to get out of the situation and then talk to maybe you need to call the helpline and see what you can do in that particular situation for that community. So most of all, people who are thinking about suicide are in a tremendous amount of pain. They want to know that someone, anyone, cares for them. That alone can bring hope to a person and avert suicide. Get help for them. Unless you're educated and qualified to treatment, hand them off to somebody who has been trained. That is typically a helpline in certain circumstances. Listen, listen, listen. It's more important than you trying to fix them or their problems. Don't get in an argument with them. Like, I think you're depressed. They're going to, no, I'm not. Yes, you are. No, I'm not. Yes, you are. Don't go there. It's not worth it. So don't try to fix them. Be there to listen. You can prevent suicide. It's not inevitable just because a person is talking or thinking that way. Now here's a slide that I pulled off the internet somewhere. As you can see, admittedly, it's an unknown source. My apologies if there's any copyright infringement. But this young person here has a sign that pretty much says it all. Suicide does not end the chances of life getting worse. Suicide eliminates the possibility of it ever getting better. So, how do you protect your mental health? In closing up here, this is from the yalemedicine.org, and just a few of their things that they put out. Control your exposure to the news, which I find it kind of ironic, yalemedicine.org/news. However, we do know that the news out there can be awfully depressing. So control your exposure to the news. Practice mindfulness. There's lots of information out there on being mindful, meditation and prayer and all of that. There's exercises to strengthen your brain. You can find ways to be social to your own personal level and understand that there's introverts and extroverts. And so what is relaxing to one is not necessarily relaxing to the other, but find a way to be social. Do something that you enjoy. Get adequate sleep. And finally, my thoughts. Keep in mind that COVID-19 is going to pass eventually, as in all things that do. If routines are your friend, make some new comfortable ones for you. All of our routines have been hijacked. And so if you find routines are comforting to you, make some new ones that fit into your schedule. But if you feel like you're in a rut, then do something that you've never tried before but wanted to. Bring out your kid at least once a day. Swing on a swing. Dance for no reason. Sing at the top of your lungs. Certainly don't wait for others to hand you happiness. I think you might be sorely disappointed, especially if you're around a bunch of negative people and you're waiting for them to hand you happiness. Good luck. You need to find your own source of happiness. Don't wait on others to give that to you. Count your blessings. Be thankful for what you have and give to those that are less fortunate. Treat others how you would want to be treated, and say a kind word to someone every day. Let's say a kind word to someone every day, and start today. You wouldn't believe how kind of easy that is to do in a way, just to give a compliment, and actually how good it feels. And the recipient often feels quite a bit better too. And lastly, don't give up living. You're living until you're not. And so continue to live life. I don't believe life should be something that ends at a certain age. You know, it's sort of like I've heard some folks say, well, I'm 50 years old. My life is kind of over. It's like, you know, it's not over until it's over. Go out and find things to do. Find things of interest. Learn something. Do something. Be your kid again. And so life is worth living until you no longer have it. So overall, I want to say thanks. Thanks to Hexnode. Next slide. Thanks to Hexnode for allowing me to do this presentation on mental health. And go spread some hope for those people that hurt. I want to thank you. I'm Raymond Anderson from Lifelink Training Institute in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Thank you, and have a good day.